questions boil down to two things: the European Union and Brexit. Of course, it has to boil down to Brexit because that's been all consuming for the past 3 years. Um, we are inundated with the right wing perspective of Brexit, like all over the place, Nigel Farage, Rees-Mogg. And the perspectives that we get is essentially we need to take our country back, that type of thing, kind of the Trumpian type perspectives. But there is a Tony Benn school of thought going back years ago when the European Union was first constructed, especially like I think it was Code and Steel or Steel and to some effect, this kind of
unity, yeah.
Yeah. And this eventually became this kind of political body in the 90s. What was the left wing reason for Brexit? And what is the left wing, like, what was the original perspective of the left or the Euroscepticism from the left? And what is it now? Like, what is the argument from the left of Brexit now? And why aren't there more people on the left pushing this perspective? Because I know that Jeremy Corbyn, I got to be honest, I don't fully believe that Jeremy Corbyn believes the Brexit stuff. I think he pushes it for political reasons. But I'll let you explain this because you've been a trumpeter for this, for the left-wing perspective of Brexit. And I've been agnostic towards the whole Brexit thing because I thought my thinking is Corbyn can't enact his policies under the European Union. So that's my perspective of Brexit. But what's yours? What was the original skepticism for Brexit from the left? What is it now? And why aren't there more people involved in it from the standpoint of the left?
Well, as you mentioned, Mr. Benn, let me say that I'm a follower of his. I have been all of my life. He was a political father for me. I was with him from my teenage years, and I was at his funeral. I followed him all over the country. I drove him over half of the country. So if Mr. Benn was against the European Union, the first thing that you can knock on the head is the idea that this is any kind of Donald Trump opposition, because no one could be more elegantly, in a more erudite way, a socialist and an internationalist. He was a man who had only one flag, and that flag was red. He's not a little Englander. He's not a little Britisher. He doesn't hate foreigners. He was married to an American for over 50 years. And you know how hard that can be.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't think Ben was like a Trump figure. My thing is like all of these people who are pushing this stuff is oftentimes like the people who you see on television is often right wingers pushing it, you know.
Of course, I understand that. But because they're pushing something and we're pushing something, it doesn't mean that we're pushing it for the same reasons.
Agreed. Yes.
We see life through the portals, as Mr. Benn himself did say thousands of times. We see life through the portals of our own experience. And my objection to the European Union in 1975, when I was 21 years old and I was Tony Benn's runner, literally getting his tea, and he drank a lot of tea, traveling around the country with him at the age of 21, was, first of all, democracy.
Yeah.
Cannot be governed by someone you didn't elect and cannot remove. You see, we've had monstrous governments in our country, and we've got one now. The difference is we can remove the government that we have now. We did not elect the European Union, and we could never remove it, even if it introduced democracy, which it has no intention of doing. We would still be in the position that 27 other countries could outvote us. And if we wanted to pursue the political lines of Mr. Benn or Mr. Corbyn, if the other 27 said no, it would be no. So there is no democracy in the European Union. The European Parliament, which is up for re-election currently, is a rubber stamp assembly, which has not the vaguest connection to the polity it's supposed to represent. I'm taking a guess here. It's an educated guess. not 5%, and I include myself, and I'm a political junkie, not 5% of the British public could name 5 members of the European Parliament.
Yeah.
And we have, I think, 75 of them. So not,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought
not
it was like 69, but yeah, same difference, yeah.
5 of them. That's how little connection they have. And the Parliament, the European Parliament, does nothing. It can propose no legislation. It doesn't elect the Commission. The Commission itself is a self-perpetuating, bloated, gargantuan, elephantine organization of enormous wealth and absolutely no accountability. In the entire history of the European Union, its accounts have never been audited. No
Wow.
auditor,
That's
no
amazing.
auditor would put their name to a single year's financial accounts of the European Commission. So it's deeply corrupt. It is fantastically extravagant and all on the public dime. The European Parliament has no control over it whatsoever, cannot hold it accountable in any way.
Just so I'm clear, the European Parliament only gives yes or no to the laws that the European Commission proposes.
Not even that. It cannot say yes or no permanently. It can block, delay, but it cannot propose legislation and it cannot permanently oppose legislation. So it is a classic rubber stamp parliament. That's the first reason I'm against it. Because it's not that I believe in nation states. I believe that nation states are here today and gone tomorrow. I loved a nation state called the USSR, and now it doesn't exist. I spent time in a nation state called the German Democratic Republic. It no longer exists. I used to like going to Czechoslovakia. Now it's 2 countries. So Czechoslovakia no longer exists. The southern part of your country used to be in Mexico. If my country of Scotland had won in the uprising of 1715, we would have been a part of France now because we were revolting against English rule in alliance with France. You see my point? So it's not because I love nation states. I don't. My flag too is red. It's because I believe that at this juncture in human relations, a nation state is the closest thing that we can get to a state that can be controlled democratically. It's not too big, and hopefully it's not too small. It's one of the reasons I'm against Scottish separatism, for example, because I don't believe that a country of 5 million can easily stand up to the vicissitudes, the turbulence of international capitalism and so on. But a state like Britain of 75 million people is roughly the size that it can be democratically controlled, and it's large enough and strong enough to make its own way in the world with the policies it chooses. Which brings me to my second point. And you alluded to it in your introduction, in your question. The politics I believe in are illegal in the European Union. What do I mean by that? It is illegal in the European Union to run a fiscal deficit of more than 3% of your GDP, your gross domestic product. So if the British economy required, in the view of the democratically elected government of Britain, a pump priming Keynesian injection of public capital to kickstart either an economy or a part of an economy or a region or an industry. Let's say, for example, the motor car industry collapse in Britain, which might very well happen. We could not, for example, use fiscal measures, spending public money to achieve that kickstart if it took our deficit above 3%. Now, my view is it might be a good idea or a bad idea to have a deficit of more than 3%, but it's our business. It's not the business of the European Commission. It's not even, with all respect, the business of the Prime Minister of Hungary. or Romania or Bulgaria. It's not their business. It's our business to choose a government and to hold that government accountable. I'll give you a better example that will be more recognizable. Jeremy Corbyn wants to bring the railway industry, the gas industry, the electricity industry, partially the banking industry, into public ownership, nationalize them.
Yeah.
Very traditional Labour views.
And God bless him for it.
That's not allowed under the European Union. All goods and services must be open to competitive tendering. In other words, if Richard Branson, who currently runs much of our railways, Richard Branson, the Virgin Islander, he's a Virgin Islander because he bought a Virgin Island, not because he comes from there. He pays no tax in Britain, but he is legally required to be allowed to tender competitively for our railways. So Jeremy Corbyn would not be allowed under the rules of the EU, which are not just rules that can be changed, by the way. They're in the Articles of Association. They're actually in the Constitution of the European Union, a constitution which cannot be changed. There is no way of changing it, literally. All goods and services, including our health service, including our railways, everything must be open to competitive tendering from private companies, who will then, in the good times, make private profit from them, and in the bad times, have to be bailed out by the taxpayer anyway. And this happened with Richard Branson on the railways. Very recently, he won a competitive tendering competition for the East Coast Main Line, running from London right up the east coast of Scotland. And then, because he didn't make as much profit from it as he had hoped that he would, he just walked away from the tender that he had made. So what happens? The public have to bail out the private business, which has, he competitively tendered for the East Coast Main Line. And when he didn't make as much profit from it as he anticipated, he simply walked away. And the taxpayer then had to pick up the tab. Now, this pattern of private profit but public liability is the preferred pattern of Western capitalism.
Yeah.
Because banks are too big to fail. If they collapse, we have to bail them out, and we did. But while times are good and they're making lots of profit, the profit goes to the private shareholders and owners, not the taxpayer. So I believe in, and Mr. Benn believed in, and I imagine that Mr. Corbyn still believes in, though he probably wouldn't be wise to say so, an economy which is not exclusively publicly owned. I'm not in favor of nationalizing everything. Anyone who's ever eaten in a state-run restaurant knows what I mean, or worn a suit made by a state tailor knows what I mean. So I believe in a mixed economy. The argument is about what the mix is, but that it should contain an element of state planning and state direction, to some extent what China has now. But that's illegal under the European Union. You're not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
So why should I remain in an organization that I didn't elect, cannot remove, but can dictate to me, as they did to the people in Italy very recently on this 3% of GDP deficit? They instructed the elected government of Italy to cut their deficit, even though the elected government of Italy had run on a program to increase the deficit, to kickstart the economy, bring young people that were unemployed into work, and so on. And of course, more famously, they destroyed the Greek economy. They destroyed the Greek people. They decimated. Something like 60% of all young people in Greece were at the depths unemployed. 50% of the young people under 26 in Spain unemployed. 50% of the young people under 26 in Portugal unemployed. Now, when Portugal elected a left-wing government, which included the Communist Party and other left parties, they were told by the European Union, that they could not bring communists into the government.
That's amazing. In their own government, by the way. Meaning that's a country. That's not a state. Like in America, sometimes we may have this thought, this idea of states. These are full-on countries that are sovereign within their own right.
These are nominally sovereign countries, members of the United Nations, members of NATO. And they're being told by someone whose name they don't even know, certainly can't pronounce. I mean, I've seen the names of the people ruling us in Brussels, but most of them I can't pronounce. I don't speak their language. So how can I say that you will tell me what deficit I can run, who can run my railways, which parties can be in my government? This is monstrous.
It's an extraordinary, thing. Like I couldn't imagine the United States allowing something to that effect. It's pretty extraordinary. Well, what about?
You're exceptional, of course.
Yeah, we're exceptional. Yeah. Let me ask you this.